we say goodbye to our former colleagues, we also look forward to welcoming our next two panelists. And we have Professor Dr. Madhura Yadav from the Manipal University. She's a very, very esteemed member of our design cohort and also a very distinguished academician, a practitioner. She teaches at the Manipal University on design, architecture, planning, and has special interest in heritage conservation and designing of smart cities. And we will be requesting her today to speak about how to design smart villages, especially as we see a lot of return to the roots of the migrants from within and from outside, the immigrants from outside the country, and how in the scheme of things, design, not just industrial design, but also, and not just industrial design or designing of government policies, because evidence-based designing of government policies becomes very important. But I think designing in the physical world, the skeuomorphic designing, how to repurpose existing things and make them speak or work for futuristic requirements, make design simple, make design utilitarian, make design useful, make design adaptable to across generations, to be able to be intergenerational, is what Professor Dr. Madhura Yadav ji will be speaking today on. And this also connects very beautifully with this aspect of science, with the new education policy talks about, where they have added the A of humanities to STEAM, the STEM field of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. So I think this interconnect, this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, translational research, I think Madhura ji and her topic fits in beautifully. So I welcome you, Madhura ji, and I will just also welcome Smit Shah ji, who has joined us. So these are some virtual flowers from DST and our media partner, ELITS, from all of us and from the August audience for our two esteemed participants. We thought that there is no conference without a floral welcome, so I thought we should do a virtual floral welcome. So we very, very cordially invite you, and I also very, very warmly welcome Mr. Smit Shah, who is the Director of Partnerships at the Drone Federation of India, and is spearheading various aspects to build a robust drone ecosystem in India. His core focus resonates very much with me, sir. I have been speaking on various forums, and Madhura ji will bear me out, about requesting universities, institutions, and colleges to do policy advocacy. And when I saw that little thing, policy advocacy changes, bring standardization, two of my very, very favorite things, which stand embedded in a lot of my design cohort meetings also. So I'm very happy to have that space in your bio. He also has previous experience of entrepreneurship, where he founded a healthcare startup company called Check App, which was also involved in working with large public and private hospitals. So, sir, I welcome you very much. And our theme for today's vertical is design, drones, and development. And I think the two of you will be our very, very august and esteemed panel for today's discussion. This session is for about an hour, and may I request you to speak for about 15 minutes each, if you have by way of a presentation, PPT, or otherwise. And we'd like to have some room for discussion and question and answers. So I very, very warmly welcome you. And if Edith Karthik, you would also like to welcome them on behalf, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Again, thank you so much to you and Department of Science and Technology, Government of Rajasthan, for giving us an opportunity to partner with the Government of Rajasthan in such wonderful initiative of Stride, of bringing more than 1,000 people together on one platform across the globe. It's a landmark achievement, and we are very happy and honored to be a part of it. And on the second day of this conclave, in this very important session on design, drones, and development, I would like to welcome Dr. Madhura Yadav and Mr. Smit Shah. आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है. Warm welcome. on behalf of Let's Techno Media. I welcome all of you, and we look forward for a wonderful session and discussion on these such important and very new and topics like drone and design and development. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll just go backstage and over to you, Mukta ma'am.
So thank you so much, Karthik. It's wonderful to know that your platform has provided us huge outreach. So now may I welcome Professor Dr. Madhura Yadavji to make her presentation. We are already running a little late, but no worries because we only have a lunch break, and I'm sure the audience won't mind being a little late. So you have all the time, and we have only 2 speakers. So go right ahead, and all the best to the both of you.
I would like to thank Department of Science and Technology and especially Mugdha Madam to invite me on designing future smart villages. I'll like to start my presentation. How can I share my screen actually?
There is a small icon on the bottom of your screen which says mute, stop camera, and then share screen. Can you see?
Yeah.
So can you just press the share screen and you'll be able to do it.
Okay. Green screen, right?
Yeah, share screen.
One minute. I think, sorry.
Can the Stride technical team please help Madhura ji launch her
Presentation, yeah.
There is
yeah.
There is a screen. If you just there's a share screen on your bottom computer screen. Can you just tap it, double click it? I think you're.
Yeah.
Can you do it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. If you do it, you will be able to see it first on your screen, and we'll be able to see it. Does it say
yes.
presenting, Madhura presenting?
Yeah.
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 We can't see it.
Is it visible now?
No.
Now? Is it visible now, madam?
No, no, no.
Oh.
Hello.
Sorry for this.
Can you see the share screen option?
Yeah, share your screen. I have already shared. Then it is asking for share. Yeah, at the bottom.
You can click on that screen and then
your entire screen. Then application window and Chrome tab is there.
So what you do, Madhura ji, is that you reduce the size of the screen on which you are seen here, right? Just take it to one corner, and then you put your presentation on the other corner of the screen of the laptop. And then when it says share screen window, you'll be able to do it.
Okay, I'll just try.
Yeah.
Sorry for this.
Not at all.
Share. Sorry.
Are you able to do it?
No, madam.
Can you share the screen, ma'am, now?
Yeah, I am looking at 3 options, like computer option is there, right? I am clicking on that. Then I can see screen sharing. No, screen sharing is easiest within 2 computer monitors. Then screen sharing works based on good computer. And some screens let you share audio. So which share screen I am doing again. Yeah, after that I can.
Share screen.
Yeah, your entire screen,
you
application window and. Yeah.
तो you can click on entire screen वाला जो आता है उस पे click करिए एक बार.
उस पे click नहीं हो रहा सर इधर से.
Just click और नीचे share button पे click कर दीजिए.
अच्छा Madhura ji, can you do one thing? Can you email your presentation to Karthik? What's your email quickly?
Yeah, I'll send, and till the time then we can start with the other speaker. Then after that,
okay.
That will be
so
better.
Karthik, you have call her and take her thing on presentation and do it. So sorry, can we have Smith Shah ji in the meanwhile? Are you ready, sir? Can we have your presentation? Not at all.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I have a very small presentation that I'll share.
Sure.
Is my presentation visible now?
Yes.
Sure. So I'll briefly talk about the
We can't hear you.
perspective. Hello?
It's better now.
Yeah. Better now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll briefly talk about the Drone Federation of India and then move on to the different aspects that we are working on.
We are losing your voice, sir.
Hello?
Better.
Hello?
I can hear you now. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes. So the Drone Federation of India is a industry-led body that generally promotes and strives the entire drone ecosystem. And our core focus is to bring the drone industry together, right from thought leaders, industry experts, and visionaries together, so that their experience can be shared and we can build a sustainable ecosystem. And this building the industry to making a robust policy and to promoting new use cases that the drone industry can provide to the traditional businesses. So that's what the DFI is about, and we generally represent the drone industry in India in front of the regulators, in front of different departments to promote the drone technology in India. So that's the organization that I represent. And moving forward, just to share where we are right now. So we call it the DFI network. We have about 30 plus Indian drone manufacturers within the network, 50 plus service providers, and more than drone pilots in the drone pilot community that we have. And these are the people who are generally contributing to different use cases, whether it is a public sector use case or a private sector use case, and promoting the drone technology in India. The 2000 plus drone pilots that we generally have right now, we are also collaborating with different state police and disaster management authorities and municipal corporations for the COVID-19 monitoring aspect as well. So we are currently helping all the different authorities in more than 10 states all across India to promote the different drone surveillance and drone speaker-based technology to assist all our authorities. And
so your voice is
that's the so that's the work that we are doing right now, and that's the focus area. So from an application perspective, and just some of the partners and members that we have, we represent all the of the drone ecosystem as well as the different ancillary ecosystem that is there, whether it's a cloud service provider or insurance companies or legal counseling from a holistic aspect. We bring the entire community so that the ecosystem can thrive. So that's what we do. And from a focus area perspective, so these are the different slices of the pyramid that we are. It is policy advocacy or use advocacy of drones, skill development, partnerships. So these are the different things that we are currently working on.
We are losing your voice, sir.
Hello?
Yeah, better. Come back.
Yeah. Yep. So a few examples of what we are focusing on probably would follow on next few slides. So if you look at the policy advocacy perspective, so we have been able to bring the focus from a regulatory and authority perspective to build a much more robust and much more operational drone policy in India. So these are a few examples of what we have been working on. So whether it is a voluntary disclosure scheme of non-compliant drones in India or a special portal being created for a much more quick permission for drone flying in India, which is the Garuda portal under the Ministry of Civil Aviation, or a few new policies that are coming out to regulate the drone industry. So we keep advocating different policies, different positions, and keep representing the industry in front of the regulator in all such aspects. So these are the few things that we are currently working on. So different rules are coming in, which are going to be a part of the Aircraft Act, and the different policies that are coming out. So these are a few things we to make sure that we can promote the entire Make in India initiative, and we can promote the entire ecosystem that is available in India. So that's the policy advocacy front. From a drone use advocacy, these are a few examples that we have been working on. So we have been advocating the procurement of drones for the by different police authorities, as well as we are advocating the use of drones for land records, railways, mining. These are all recent use cases that I am in the same connection. I'm not sure what is happening. Yeah, so these are we are working on, as well as the COVID-19 related use cases that I mentioned earlier, and a very recent one, which is the locust outbreak that is there. So agriculture ministries as well, in sync with the Ministry of Civil Aviation, to advocate the use of drones, especially for the locust outbreak as well. So that's the second thing that we are working on. So how can we promote more and more private and public sector collaborations and use cases for promoting the drone technology? So these are different things in which the drones can be used generally. The second focus obviously is on skill development. So while the drones are a much more efficient technology, how can we make sure that the technology is much more responsible and skill based? So current discussions are ongoing to initiate some kind of partnership with the National Skill Development Corporation, as well as the NSIC TSC that is available right now. So how can we create a nationally recognized certification program that essentially becomes a drone training is the focus area as well, from a skill development aspect. And a few examples from a partnership aspect is the various drone and that we have been able to promote from the police authority. The drone insurance that we have been able to promote. So we keep doing a lot of work in sync with the different industry gaps and the regulatory gaps that are available. So how can we bring in different partners, and we can make sure that the different issues that are there in the ecosystem can be addressed. So insurance is a big gap currently. There is no formal there is no formal drone insurance product available right now. So that's something that we are working on. Just a moment. Yeah, so I'm in the same connection. Maybe there is a problem with the audio, but I hope the slides are going to be descriptive as well. So in case you are losing me, the slides will help you follow. Yeah, talking about some local collaborations. So there are certain compliances that the Indian manufacturers have to achieve. So what we've been able to do is we have been able to create an ecosystem where multiple local companies can help each other to achieve those compliance requirements, so that more and more companies can actually become compliant, and regularization of drone activities can keep happening. And the fourth thing is the international collaboration. So like we have the Drone Federation of India here. We also have different such alliances all across the world. So we collaborate with them on a much more active format, so that the entire knowledge transfer and technology transfer can happen not just on a national level, but also on an international level. So more from a standardization and an R&D perspective, we are co-authoring certain certain manufacturing schemes that are going to be the robust that are going to make sure that the drones that are being manufactured in India will have some minimum level of manufacturing and standardization. So we do as Drone Federation of India, generally we partner with a government organization or a regulator, and we help them with the domain experts. So we don't just give recommendations, but we actually get in the mud and we actually work. The scheme or the entire project is not just planned but also executed towards success. So we are creating certain schemes like that, either from a manufacturing perspective or a operations perspective. So what happens if you want to plan a smart city, for example? So there is an entire process of surveying and mapping that is being used by traditional technology. So how can we partner up with different departments under the science and technology or under the Survey of India generally, and create certain different SOPs for such drone operations, which can be followed on a national level. So these are certain focus areas that we keep working on, so that there can be basic amount of hygiene when it comes to using of drones and acquiring data and creating some kind of output. All this, obviously, when we talk about standardization, it talks about safe standards and robust standards. But obviously, there is an entire plug-in to promotion of R&D. So by the way of raising grants and raising different funds, we also promote R&D so that the standards can keep evolving in a much more startup manner, in a much more holistic and much more aggressive manner, so that we can have better technology, better standards, which keep evolving and keep giving the latest output in a standardized format. So that's generally the goal that we have. And generally, like we focus on a much more collaborative approach. So we have a lot of committees and working groups that we create, and that we generally work with, so that there is a much more inclusive format where different departments of the government, regulatory bodies, as well as the industry come together and form a joint committee. And there is an entire process that we follow so that all of this can actually move forward, and it can, move forward in a much more structured way. So, essentially that's what we follow. So there is a working group, a suggestion note, which then goes to the committee for a much more hygiene check and much more regulatory intervention and inclusion. And then it goes to different members, which generally vote in a much more unilateral format. So whatever is being out from an industry body perspective or collaborative perspective, gender holders, whether it is from the service provider side, which is the manufacturers and the service providers, or the customer side. And this is the function of the industry body that in the future, so that we can build a much more robust, inclusive, technology and R&D driven drone ecosystem in India. So that's generally from my side. Drone Federation of India invites more and more government and private industry collaborations to build a more robust industry, drone industry in India, more focused on the Made in India aspect. And I'm looking forward to collaborate with individuals, either panel or who are watching us today, to help us generally grow this industry in India. So that's it from the presentation side, and I'll probably be happy to take on certain questions or certain preliminary doubts if someone has, either right now or at the end of the session.
So thank you very much. That was also well within the time, and I think it was very nice, because one is hearing so much of the drone, drones. In fact, Madhura ji is here with us, and in our Vigyan Utsav also there were certain universities and colleges whose children have designed drones. I also had the good fortune to visit TISC at IIT Jodhpur. And their children have also designed drones, right from designing the circuitry, the electronic things that are embedded. Sorry, I won't know the exact name of things, but to tell you, because those are not as yet available in India, and IIT was able to do it. There is a professor who's guiding the development of drones. I also think that Smit Shah ji, we should, DST, Government of Rajasthan, and DFI should collaborate, because we have launched a project with ISRO in Tonk using drones to study 2 gram panchayats. So my request is we should now look at policy building, because that you are policy advocating. I quite liked the word, but my job as a science administrator is to institutionalize policies so that they get embedded in the thought process and enable and facilitate implementation. Just using drones and getting awed and glamorized by drones will not be sufficient in the long run. So I am requesting to share your contact details so that we can have a small discussion, and I will send you a little format of the policy that I have in mind, also incorporating not just the civil aviation and the agriculture ministry, but the science and technology department from the R&D point of view, and also the disaster management department, because it is in disaster that we can save a lot of lives of people. And also there is a cultural aspect to drones, because now with the lockdown, I realized that a lot of drone photography of cities was taking us from a 3D reality to maybe a 7 and a 9D reality. Drones are coming handy for in a lot of, in fact, I don't remember which state, I think it was Tamil Nadu, which was trying to track violators of COVID-19 in forest areas using the drone technology. Drones have been used by the greyhounds to track the movement of certain people. So I think also with it will come a whole lot of privacy issue, because drones can do a lot of things. It's almost like technology breaking firewalls. This is doing it in the more private physical world. But Mr. Smitshaw, I would also like you, if you can, maybe now or little later, talk to us about 2 or 3 things. Is retail of drones available? Can a buyer? You need a license to operate, so it's almost like a gun now, right? So do you also need a license to buy one? Second is, what is the cost of the drone for a public? Are there different kinds of drone? For a government person, I'd also like to know what are has anybody ever designed a tender document for tendering out drone, mentioning the specifications, because you are talking of standardization, and in the government, we cannot buy a company, a brand. We only have to use the specifications, and being a non-technical person, specifications of drones would become very, very important for the government. So that is an area I don't know much. Also, from a very DST point of view, I'd like you to make a presentation, and this will be a part 2. You don't need to do it in stride, but we will engage with you again. We want you to make a presentation on the different parts of the drone, because unless I understand the different parts of the drone, as which is the electrical part, which is the electronic part, I will not be able to make a proper policy, because I will need to understand from the diagram of the drone as to what other departments will need to be brought on board. So maybe very soon, Dr. Manu Sikarwal, our project director, will get in touch with you, and I have requested him to obtain your numbers. I will strike a conversation with you after this, maybe sometime in the next 2 or 3 days. And we'd like to build a policy around drones and be the first state in the country to be able to do that in partnership with DFI. So thank you very much. I am really, really happy that there is a federation. There is somebody behind. There is a industry-led non-profit body behind the drones. I'm so happy to strike this conversation, and we will take up questions later on. But these are some, I was just some eureka thoughts that came provoked by the wonderful presentation that you made. So many thank yous to you, gratitude. Thank you very much, and please hold on, because we will come back to questions, and you can probably answer some of these questions to close this conversation before we move to Madhuraji. So Madhuraji, we are all prepared after this? Okay. So Mr. Smitshaw, please.
Yeah, I would like to address the policy piece that you mentioned. What is the drone policy right now in India? Well, very it's defined into 2 categories, whether it's for civil purpose or non-civil purpose. And when it comes to the civil purpose, there is the entire drone policy, which we now call the Drone Policy 1.0, which the Ministry of Civil Aviation and the DGCA actually came up with. And it talks about a very single platform, which is the Digital Sky platform. And with that, what has happened is there has been a lot of forward thinking done from a policy angle, where one needs to have a license for manufacturing the drone, which is manufacturing or selling the drone. That is one aspect of things. Then there is another license required for flying the drone. Yeah, there is another license which is required for flying the drone. There is another license required if you are not an independent pilot, but if you are an organization. So if you are an organization and you are pilots under that, then there is a third license required. So there is a lot of clearances and license required. And also all of these licenses and clearances also require you to have a MHA security clearance. So imagine if you are a startup and you are trying to build drones in certain categories and your core focus is innovation. The current assumption has been in such a way, and I wouldn't call it a very good assumption or a bad assumption, because the things look good on paper, but operationalization in about 2 years. So it's been 2 years since the policy came out. But if you ask me a question, Smith, can you make a drone and fly a drone and complete an operation in a complete legal format in India? So currently, for civil purpose, the answer is no. So we have a policy in place. Multiple aspects of the policy are operational. The policy is not 100% operational right. It was a good start. Recently, there has been an accelerated push on making sure that the operationalization of policy can happen in a much more quick format. What I would like from a much more policy angle would be that policy making, at least from an industry like drone, has to be considered not from a traditional approach, but from a startup approach, because it is ideally fall in the startup category. This is a technology which needs constant innovation. And if we are looking at regulating this technology from a traditional regulatory aspect, then it will actually technology thrive. It will not let the technology grow, because the technology will probably grow in labs. It will probably grow in IIT. And I've been fortunate enough to speak to a few professors, and the kind of technology that they're working on is extremely futuristic. That is what India should go forward with. But unfortunately, there is a big gap when it comes to commercialization of that technology. If we are to innovate in the labs, it is to make sure that the project can come out of the lab and it can go in the commercial hands of the different customers, so that they can take benefit of that. So probably, yes, collaborating with Department of Science and Technology, ma'am, as you rightly pointed out, would be the most a proper integration, where we can work on the technology aspect, understand what is the technology path for drones in India, and then plug in that with the policy, so that the policy is built in the way of evolution of technology, and not really from a reverse format. So that is where policy is right now. So 99% operational, not 100% operational. Big black, not a gray area, but a black area for the 1%, which requires you to build tenders, scale this. And forward thinking needs to happen now from a technology evolution perspective, and not just a regulatory evolution perspective. So that's about the policy aspect. And from a Make in India aspect, maybe I would want to add something here. We need to have core focus on building an entire holistic ecosystem. So if you ask me right now, can we build drones in India? Yes, we can build drones in India, but it requires certain key critical components. For example, motors, propellers, electronic speed controllers. That is not being manufactured in bulk in India. We have the capability, but probably not the right motivation for the right players to get into that segment. So how can we build an entire ecosystem so that more and more components, not just the drone, majority of the drone players currently buy a few components and then assemble the drone, which is a good approach from an application building perspective. But from a drone manufacturing perspective, it's not really a good approach. We need to build more motors. We need to build more circuitry in India. We need to build more propellers in India. So how can we promote that independent research? How can we promote certain niche aspects in collaboration with private and public sector research, either way of grants or either way of competition or hackathons nationally, so that the talent which is already there, it's already present in India. We have all of that in India. We can recognize that and start commercializing that within the country. So that would be, my suggestion from a ecosystem building perspective as well.
No, thank you. That was very useful. I have made a note and I will submit very soon a draft a concept paper trying to at least get on board all the various wide aspects that I have understood from you. And please feel free to guide us and make changes, and then maybe probably we could come up with a draft. I'm a slightly impatient person, so you should have the draft pretty quick, lest I forget.
Same here.
So one little, Manu will share my coordinates with you. One last question I have, which I think needs to be answered, is from my own curious perspective. How much will a basic model of a drone cost?
Again, key differences here between whether it's and this is from
civil purpose.
Yeah. So if you go to buy a drone today, like I'm talking from a today perspective, drone which is DGCA compliant, which is built and certified by the DGCA would cost at least 3 to 4 times more than the drone which generally people are using for all COVID-19 related use cases. So, and from a price aspect, it would be something around 2 lakhs in compared to a 6 lakh or an 8 lakh rupee drone for a general surveying purpose, if I may so say. Definitely the cost ranges right from 2 lakhs to 50 lakhs, depending on the different use cases, and it may be multiplied in different aspects. But if you talk about the most basic drone, it would cost you a 2 lakh versus a 6 lakh from a compliant and a non-compliant perspective, as of what the situation is right now in India.
Yeah. So there is one interesting question which has come, and I think what happens in the government sector usually is that the developments are not muhtaj, are not dependent on government policy making technology. So they are happening even as we speak today, and it's only when things come out in the public domain that we realize the need for regulation and monitoring. And I like the bit about the use of regulatory, because we are living in a liberalization, post-liberalization, post-modern, and now also post-COVID times. And I see you said license number 1, license number 2, license number 3. So I was just having exactly, high five for that. And maybe I think we can do a handshake on policy making. I don't know. I mean, we can do a virtual handshake. No, the other hand, please. Yeah. Okay. So this is a handshake we are doing. So we will build, this is a virtual handshake we are doing to build up a drone policy with DFI. So thank you very much. And now please stay with us, because there might be questions towards the end if we have time. And now I warmly welcome Professor Dr. Madhura Yadav from drones. See, also now the cities also have to look at the drones, to see how they need to be built, how the privacy of public spaces will need to be protected in a world where the drones will be hovering over us. So over to Madhura ji for her presentation on how to conceptualize, design, and build smart villages of the future in post-COVID times. Over to you, ma'am. Your mic is switched off. You need to switch on your mic, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll start presentation. My topic is future of design of smart village. And next slide. The structure of presentation will be, next slide, please. What is smart village? Hello. Yeah, back. What is smart village? And then what is the concept of smart village? Then what are the objectives? Then I have given a concept of acoustics, that is a science of human settlements. then some examples, and then how to design a future village. So in India, if we see, there are 6 lakhs villages, and out of which 1,25,000 villages are still not having basic infrastructure. So there is a need for designing and building a village that is smart. So this concept is not new, and it is given by our leader, Rashtrapita Mahatma Gandhi, that it's called Swaraj or Suraj village, and now we are calling it as a smart village. So the vision is in the development of education, health, productive enterprise, clean water, sanitation, environmental sustainability, and participatory approach. Next slide. Now, what is the concept of smart village? I read different definitions, and I thought of giving some definition. That basic concept of smart village is to design or plan village which is self-reliant with participatory approach, which is the agenda of our government to make our country Atmanirbhar. So smart is prefix and it is not an acronym. So I think S stands for self-reliant, then M stands for managing our local resources, A stands for adapting to changing needs, and R stands for responsive to climate, socio-cultural, socio-economical needs, and T stands for techno-savvy. We need to be techno-savvy. And I think the model of smart village cannot be one for all places. It will differ from nations to regions to cities and the local context. So it is contextual. We cannot adopt the same model for all the villages. Now, in 1948, the Doxidias has given the theory of science of human settlement that is called as equistics. And in this, which he explained how the settlement evolves. So there are 5 elements on which the settlement evolves. So the basic principles of equistics are maximization of human potentials in a certain area. Man will select the location and which permits a maximum of potential contact. Then maximization of efforts, a minimum of effort, terms of energy, time, and cost. Man selects the most convenient routes, so that decides the path of the settlement. Then optimization of man's protective space, the shelter, the buildings, and optimization of man's relationship with his environment. And the last is optimization of 4 previous principles. So based on this principle of equistics, the settlement, let it be rural or let it be urban settlement, but it evolves. Any settlement will evolve on the base of these 4 principles. Next. Now, what are these elements, or how do we classify these human settlements? He has given these 5 elements of settlements, that is nature. We have to design with nature. Then anthropologist, like design is not based only a job of architect or a designer. We need anthropologists, we need sociologists, we need transport planners. So it is basically a multidisciplinary approach. So nature, anthropos, society, shells, and networks. These are the basic elements of equistics. Next. Now, how can we think of a holistic approach to design a smart village of the future? So holistic approach will be based on our personal, human, social, and economical needs. We have to create sustainable communities to improve the lives of the people, because that is most important. And we are designing for the people. So how can we give them different personal attention to their different personal needs, like personal values, cleanliness, cultural heritage, then behavioral change, and then human needs about education, health, nutrition, then social security, and social needs about how can we address their needs as voluntarism for taking a participatory approach, then social values, then social justice, and we need good governance for that. Then economics, how can we improve the economics of the people by livelihoods, skills, financial inclusion is very important. Then basic amenities and services. So this will be a holistic approach to design a this future smart village. Next. Now, this model was given to us by our president, late APJ Abdul Kalam, long back in 2004. So he named the scheme as a PURA, that is providing urban amenities to rural areas. Now we have seen after this COVID-19, there is a reverse migration. And most of the things we have seen on the media also, which are the area that affected a lot. In Maharashtra, we have seen Mumbai is affected a lot because of density. Now, how can we think about our urban and rural settlement and whole as a region? Because we have to stop the migrations, and the government has also various schemes like PURA, then IDSMT was also there, a scheme integrated development of small and medium towns. So through this, we can just think what we can do to empower our rural settlements, or to motivate people to be in the towns or rural settlements, so that we can stop the migrations, because this is complementary. Urban areas are dependent on rural areas, and rural areas are dependent on urban areas in case of employment, education, and other things. And urban areas also dependent on rural areas, say for food, milk, flowers, and everything. So we have to have this comprehensive approach for our planning and designing our settlements. Next. So he has given this 4 type of PURA cluster in India, and that was very good. And I think we have to revive this concept of PURA, that is plain terrain, how the this system cluster of 20 to 30 villages, then cluster of 30 to 50 villages, hill PURA, coastal PURA, as per the climatic zones and topographical. He has divided these clusters of India, and we need to address these needs while designing human settlements. Next. Now, what is self-reliant approach for designing smart villages? So we have to know that, like sitting in universities or sitting in our offices, we cannot design the smart villages or smart cities until and unless we go there, we involve the community in designing or planning the settlement. Then only we can achieve self-reliant approach in designing our settlements. So local people takes the stock of local assets, then drawing on best available knowledge and taking actions on that. Then what are the practical solutions? And these are also proposed by the local people, because they know in and out of the settlement, they know their challenges, they know their problems. Then new opportunities available locally, then building new partnerships, then supported by funds, where NGO government will have the role. Then we have to train them for making their homes by using local material, by having cost-effective solutions, then traditional construction techniques available in the villages, and then we have to train them for education, that is distance learning nowadays, then social and cultural activities, then healthcare. We can think about mobile clinics nowadays after this COVID-19 impact. And then rural areas are the part of the solution of these wider challenges. Next. Now, I would like to give some examples of our own country. That this is a village called Hivre Bazar in Maharashtra in Ahmednagar district. And once it was a drought-prone village, and now it is the village with 60 million years. Once upon a time, there were only 90 wells in this village, and now there are 294 water wells. With watershed techniques, they have developed this village. They got lots of award for this village as an ideal village, and this is the country's first ideal village. I think earlier the per capita income of villagers was just rupees 830, and now it is rupees 30,000 today. So this village got the award of ideal village of the first of the country, and it was developed with the help of Sarpanch and villagers and NGOs, and with the help of government schemes and funds. Next. You can see the picture, how it was earlier on, I think, left-hand side picture. There was no water, it was drought-prone area, and now see the agriculture, then floriculture there. and all of them have developed with the help of villagers. Next. Then this is next slide. Then next village is Akodara village, and it is in the Sabarmati district of Gujarat, and it has earned the coveted tag of becoming India's first digital village. The village with a total digital platforms, and I think ICICI Bank has taken this village, and everything, it is a cashless village, and everything is online. Next. This is again the third village, that is called Dharnai in Bihar. This is India's first fully solar powered village, where you can see the pictures. The solar panels are there on the top of roof of houses, and how the shelters are made using solar panels, how the kids are enjoying. Next. And this is the most important village in 1983. It started with the efforts of Baba Amte, who was a Magsaysay winner award winner. And it was also like in the barren land was there. People were scared to go there. And Baba Amte has developed this village as Anandvan. The name given is Anandvan, that is a forest of joy at Bhandardara district in Maharashtra. Here I have seen, and I know that only salt and sugar is imported. Everything is produced in this village, and it is a very good example of self-sustainable or self-reliant village of the country. And it started in 1983. So we must see such examples and take some lessons to develop our future smart villages. Next. In our own country, in our own state, we are having the example of Tilonia, which is a very good village in the district, Ajmer district of Rajasthan, where people are empowered with the help of technology. They are trained, and this is a very good example to empower people with the help of technology. Next. So these are some images of Tilonia villages, and it is founded by Bankar Roy in Ajmer district. And this is a very good example of community participation and empowerment, and solutions to rural problems lie within the community. Next. This is again one village in Maharashtra called Patoda village in Aurangabad district. And this village has got many awards. It is all digital village, and then it got the award for social tourism also. And this is also with the help of community participation and Sarpanch as a leader. Next. Now I'd like to give some examples, these from India only. So there is this Mauliong Linong village near Shillong. This is the Asia's cleanest village. So for some aspects, these villages are there in the country, and we should take lessons from that. And this is the Asia's cleanest village. Next. This is again Punsari, the Indian village with all urban facilities in Gujarat. No city or town of this much in Gujarat is having this much of facilities that Punsari village have, and which is located in Gujarat. This village provides 24-hour Wi-Fi connectivity, CCTV cameras in the primary school, solar-powered lamps, an independent bus service, clean drinking water at a nominal cost of ₹4 for a 20-liter drinking water, and much more. Next. Then this is also Pothinikad village in Kerala, and this is the first Indian village to achieve 100% literacy rate in the country. Next. This is Chappar village this is an Indian village, and that has a woman empowerment. And this is known for the first woman Sarpanch of the village, and there they distribute sweets when a girl is born. So this is a very good example of woman empowerment. And again, this is Koprigi a village in Kerala, village in south part of India, which believes that conservation of nature and Karnataka. It has some of the rare species of birds visiting the village. Neither the birds nor the people have ever distributed each other. In fact, disturbed each other, sorry. In fact, villagers have created a separate area for wounded birds to rest and heal. Next. Kathewadi. This is again village from Maharashtra, and this was taken by Art of Living Foundation. The problem of village was there was people very much addiction of alcoholism. Now you can see 70% alcoholism to 0% of alcoholism, and a shop with no shopkeeper. Then 0 toilets to back. 0 toilets to 110 backslide. 0 toilets to 110 toilets, and a paved road, and that too without any external funding, only with the help of villagers and Sarpanch and Art of Living Foundation. And after Kathewadi village in Maharashtra was adopted by Art of Living Foundation in December 2008. So the money saved from this alcoholism, they have used STGs, self-help groups, and the Dan Peti scheme gave them sufficient economic independence to build toilets for each of 110 households. Next. This is a very good example again in Maharashtra, Shani Shingnapur village. That is, this village is without doors. And it is considered as the safest village in the country. The village has the country's first lockless bank branch, that is UCO Bank. Next. Now, how we have seen the different examples in one of the aspects or parameters of the smart village. Now, how can we design the future smart village with a participatory approach? Because whatever examples we have seen till now, that was possible with the help of community, Sarpanch, and the government and NGOs. So all the participation of all stakeholders is very important, and we need to understand that with the help of participatory approach, how can we design our future settlements? So I will go by 2 levels, like building at settlement level. As we have seen in the equistics, it is a science of human settlement, and any settlement evolves from the certain parameters. So we should respect our ecological determinants of the place, that is topography of the place, geology of the place, hydrology, and then as rightly said by ma'am, the use of drones for spatial and temporal analysis. Then we should respect to the climate. We should design our settlements or buildings with respect to climate. By designing climate responsive building, we can keep our buildings cool in summer and warm in winter. So we have to respect the biodiversity, then cultural, social, economical, environmental, and technological parameters. And when we think about or designing our building typologies, different typologies needed for village, like houses, then educational buildings or community centers, and etc., etc. We have to respond to the culture of people, because we have seen all the villagers will like to be socialized with each other. So we have to come up with such typologies in which we should give the clusters, villages. They can see each other. Then there should be hierarchy of space, that they should have their intimate space in the house, then courtyards in the house for their daily activities. Then they can have the smaller space of cluster of houses together, and then a larger space in the village where they all can come together, and then they can enjoy their recreational activities. So while designing building typologies, we should respect their culture, and it should be low rise, low density. Then it should be climate responsive. And then we have to understand the local constructional techniques, that is the traditional techniques which they were using. And cost is very important aspect of any built environment or any settlement. So we have to consider the cost also. How can we reduce the cost? By optimization of space, by using appropriate technology, and by using appropriate materials suitable to the place. And we have to involve people for making the settlements. As you can see in the picture, this is a picture of like after earthquake of Bhuj. This is the rehabilitation project of Gandhinu Gam, Budia village. So architect Yatin Pandya has designed this houses rehabilitation project, where you can see he is just on this discussing with the villagers, and he is asking the villagers where you want house, how was your house, what are your requirements, and then the villagers are pointing out, okay, I want to locate my house here, I want to locate, we have to have the open space here. So this is the participatory approach while designing human settlement. Next. You can see the beautiful pictures with the help of images, how they can, with the having available materials at their products at their home, how beautifully they have displayed as a part of interior. And the next picture you can see how this is called bunga, and this is a very climate responsive. Sorry, next. back. This is a very climate responsive shelter. So we have to involve people for designing our smart future villages. And I think with the help of this, I will stop here. If there are some questions, I would like to take.
So thank you, Professor Madhura. I'm so happy that I reached out to you to make this presentation. I think it was absolutely wonderful and very, very contemporary, full of examples from India. And I think, I'm sure our audience has also loved, and I especially loved getting to know the theory from where it is emerging, the icky sticks that you spoke about. And I think I'm going to read a little bit more on it. It was brilliant, outstanding. I'm so glad that this session has come together so beautifully with two untouched and so ubiquitous aspects, the drone and the design of smart cities. And I also liked the prefix and the clarification that it is not an acronym. It cannot be, because it is a very, very dynamic concept, just like the drone technology. So brilliant to both of you. Let me just quickly have a look at the time. Yeah, we have some 15 minutes, and I will be very happy to take questions from the audience. Madhura ji, how can, maybe I can ask you one question. How can this concept, can you prepare a concept note on this so that we can come up with, I'm quite intrigued to know that is Pura a part of the government system? Sorry, I've never worked in the urban development side in the ministry, so I will not really have in-depth knowledge. But is Pura a part of the policy making structure in anywhere in the states or in the country? Would you have any idea?
Yes, madam. It was there initially it was there in Vision 2020 document, and now it is there in the Vision 2035 document. We are reviving that concept, and it is a beautiful concept, but I don't know, because of some issues, it could not be materialized on the ground. But there are some states who have used this concept. And
yeah, please.
Yeah. Actually, at my PG level also, my thesis was rural area, like how can we develop the peri-urban villages. And since from the beginning, because my roots are in the villages, I know village life. So I was very much interested in village planning or village designing. And as you rightly said, I am very interested. I'm very impressed that you are saying that you should prepare some note, and I'd like to do that, ma'am.
Sure. We also have Mr. Smith joining us back for the presentation, for the panel discussion. Just one more question. Kerala government very recently has announced a very interesting overnight stay home for women who transit in cities. I think that was also a very, very unique thing, because, I have traveled extensively abroad, all solo travel, when I was studying in Berkeley, and I realized that I have stayed in Airbnbs of people, and a lot of interesting things. In fact, airport storage and storage at places of stay also is something that I am very, very particular, interested in building policy on, like, because I realize that this will be, hassle-free, so that people who don't travel light, can, once they board, can also now start to travel light. So these are very important concepts. And I think Gandhiji also spoke a lot, which you have mentioned, about Gram Swaraj, participatory development. It all comes together beautifully with the design concept. Actually, what has happened is that somehow people know the other side of the process, but they do not know the the journey or the philosophy behind what needs to be done, and I think you brought that out beautifully in your presentation. So I
one minute, ma'am. As you rightly said, that Kerala has given one this accommodation for women. Yesterday, my webinar was there on industry responsive built environment. So I exactly address these issues. Now there will be a concept of rental housing because people will move from one city to another city. So we have to think about the rental housing for different groups like students, for laborers, for single men, single women, and all these things we have to think, and how can we change our typologies now?
In fact, Madhuraji, you have again touched on something very important by talking about this, because what has happened in India for a very long time, that in trying to get rooted, Indians in the family save a lot of money, one for the daughter's wedding, and second is to build a house pre-retirement from whatever job you did, right? But that is a concept which is, I think, a very Asian concept. But when you go abroad, I have been taught by professors who, as my term was ending, were moving from the western side of the US to get a job in the eastern side at the age of 65, 68. And they were moving bag and baggage, because there is no concept of laying roots, because just because you own a property, because it's easy to buy and sell a property, and you have cracked lists when you go abroad, to get hold of properties, to rent properties. That allows you a lot of fungibility in life. Mobility in life gives you a lot of opportunities that come with movement. So I think these are other areas that now will become post-COVID. I think a lot of exciting space for designers. And also in terms of innovation, somebody recently sent me a clip of how a guy, I think somewhere in down south, has converted a small tempo into a caravan. So you can just stay in the caravan for the homeless, to address the problem of the homeless people, which we have a plenty, especially the migrants that we saw. I think this kind of bringing the design aspect and the technology aspect to solve problems of society, because the idea of science and technology and research is to be able to deliver on problems for people. Otherwise, I owe my job to people's problems, and my job is to keep solving the old problems so that I have new problems on my desk which I can solve. And I think it was wonderful listening to you. And I don't know, I really don't have any questions on the chat. I mean, there was one nice question on drone, Mr. Shah, for you. And I think I am also interested. I'm just figuring out, give me a second, I can name the gentleman who asked you. So I remember the question. The question is, what is the distance? It's Mr. Mahesh Kori. Mr. Mahesh Kori wants to know from Mr. Shah, at what height distance can drones be seen very easily to locate and identify the persons or trace the person? So you get the gist of this question. So aerially, what height is a good height? And in terms of distance, what distance is a good distance to trace and track, click, and identify people using drones?
So, hi. If we are looking at person tracking, like recognizing a particular individual, then it has to be a lot closer. A safe height would be, say, about 30 feet, 40 feet or more, because that is when the actual camera will be able to process that, will be able to gather that much data, that you will have some kind of identification. But if we are talking about other tracking technologies, like tracking a vehicle or just tracking a particular person on a bike, the objective is to identify a person first and then just keep tracking or keep following them. Then that can be done from a very huge height, about 200 feet, 300 feet as well, even above 400 feet, because that would not require much of complex processing. If you're able to uniquely identify a particular set of dot or a particular set of shape in the camera frame, then the drone will autonomously keep flying. Also, these capabilities are available in most of the drones available in the market as well. So it's not a futuristic technology. However, there needs to be a lot of responsibility when it comes to low flying or flying in densely populated areas, because there might arise a lot of unintended privacy issues as well, because you might be involving a lot of uninvolved persons. So that generally, to answer your question, about 60 feet, 70, about 40, 50 feet is a good height to identify people. And for tracking objects, it can be very high, and the person may not even like recognize whether a drone is tracking them or not. So both those aspects.
Another question that I have is, satellites also do the job of, say, doing the same thing, tracking of maybe from a distance. If you want to have a trend, say the locust, you want to trace the locust, the satellites can also do it in certain sense. The drones, of course, in a more physical and virtual sense. Is there any collaboration with ISRO which is happening as far as drones and the use of satellite technology and drones, bringing the two together so that you're tracing, especially for the police, I think, in terms of tracing of criminals, if or maybe even in the forestry department for doing some kind of what they do, these animal surveys, tiger and leopard counts, if you have drones, because these are actually working on sensors and actuators, right? So I'm sorry, these are all Eureka questions, but I thought I should ask you.
Yeah. So there is always a collaboration. So GIS companies, geospatial companies generally use satellite data or satellite technology to plan missions. So satellite mostly gives you not a very real-time footage or real-time data. So that is generally used to plan different missions, to create some kind of additional data layers. And drones are generally used to get a much more real-time situational awareness of the area, and then superimpose that on the traditional satellite and GIS layer, so that you can have a much more real-time data with the basic things like, say, for example, topography or city or villages. So that is not constantly going to change. So generally, if you are mapping a particular river basin, or you're mapping a particular urban area, so you would use the basic layer of the GIS technology and the satellite maps to plan the operation and to compare. And then the additional layer of the drone data will be used to put it on top and create another layer to create comparisons, to create more value add. So they generally go hand in hand.
Yeah, so we have another, thank you, that was useful. And I will also discuss this aspect with the ISRO people we work with, and we have a satellite, application remote sensing, satellite remote application sensing center at Jodhpur. So we will also see if we can, collaborate in some way in writing what I told you we will be writing. Madhura ji, there is one observation which has come from Ajay Aswal ji, who has implemented Pura 15 years back. He says, I felt we failed because we tried to convert villages in vicinity of cities into cities. Should we not scale down Pura development in villages as per local requirements, especially in the light of recent long-time reverse migration?
I can't, madam, can you repeat?
Oh, sorry. Ajay Aswal ji has worked in Pura and implementing Pura 15 years back, and he says it failed. I feel it failed because we tried to convert villages in the vicinity of cities into cities.
Okay.
Should we not scale down Pura development in villages as per local requirements, especially in light of recent long-time reverse migration?
Yes, of course. We have to develop our villages first, and then peri-urban villages are different because they are in the vicinity of city and they are having a larger impact of cities on them. So we have to develop villages, and with participatory approach only we can develop, because whatever examples I have given, these are developed with the help of Sarpanch and villages. So we have to bring some new model to how to develop our villages as smart villages. And another thing which you rightly said, ma'am, because after COVID, there will be a new need of how to remodel existing spaces. Because whatever buildings are constructed, that is as per the norms, like let it be educational or let it be home. Now home is We always design home to give living, dining, kitchen, bedroom, right?
Yeah.
We are not used to work from home. Now there will be new concept of how to design home with office space. The second, I feel in educational institutions also, we see that the norms are decided, like classroom should be of this much built up square feet area, or you should have lab of this much. Now the educational model also will be changed. So we have to rethink about these spaces. Let's take the example of office. Now, till now, I have seen there was a concept of open office, so that we can visually see, and then the partition of glass or something like that. Now we have to again rethink about personalized spaces. So now in built environment, I think safety and health has become a very important issue. Earlier when it evolved, the protection of weather was there. That was the most important issue. When we constructed multi-story buildings, there's different issues there, like accommodating so many people in one building. We have never given importance to health as a primary issue. Now this concept will start, that how we can take health as a major issue while designing our buildings.
No, that is very right, Madhuraji. But I must tell you, and I must grab this opportunity to tell you that government houses, especially at the district levels, and even my house, the government Sarkari house, has always had this concept of a out room, which was always supposed to be the place where the officer, after coming back, could work from home. And I remember my first district was Bundi. I did 4, and each of the houses had. In fact, it was so convenient because then you could just walk from your bedroom into and work pre your office hours, and that increased your efficiency because you could take all your calls and everything. So I think we've been pretty used to. I mean, like this is the time for the government. The post-COVID times has been very, very good for the civil servants in many ways, people recognizing the media and the civil society. So just taking that moment of 5 minutes of fame that has devolved on us thanks to the little virus making it viral. So I just thought that I must share that PWD, which is always, or the CPWD, which has always been on the receiving end of things, has always had this idea of space called work from home. And so just on a lighter note, I think we have running not short of time, but we have 2 more minutes, and I think we don't have any more questions. But I think maybe I can ask Mr. Smith Shah a small question out of curiosity. Do you know the countries? I'm sure you've read about various other countries. Can you give us a little snapshot of the various of the international experience in building policy, regulatory regimes in the drone space, and also which are the countries which are technologically up there in civil usage of drones and in policy making? A little bit of exposure to us on that side, if it's convenient to you. We could do a little a 5-minute thing now.
Sure. So I think a lot of countries are coming up with drone regulations, like let's say, for example, the US or Australia or UK or the entire European Union as well. What is happening is a lot of them are actually trusting the drone operator or the individual. So the regulator creates a regulation, and the onus of compliance is put on the citizen, and it's built on a trust first framework. So I always like to call this as a trust first framework. And in India, so regulations obviously are going to evolve, and there is going to be an international standardization, but our policy is built on a no trust first sort of framework. And essentially that means that and it has both good and bad sides as well. The good side is that if you are looking at a drone, it is a very simple thing to identify and say whether it's a compliant or a non-compliant drone, because it's a very tightly integrated system. The policy as well as the entire drone ecosystem that is built, But from a bad side, it is that it is so tightly integrated that it is very challenging for innovation to come in. Also, compliance is difficult. And in my personal opinion, and as Smith Shah's opinion, and as my personal opinion, I believe that compliance should be made so easy that it is in the best interest of more and more people to comply, because it is so easy to comply. So that is a little challenge. Just to give an example, in the US, you can buy a particular drone. It's like any other retail product. Obviously, the manufacturer has to comply with certain standards, and he has to build the product in certain minimum manufacturing standards. But from a more citizen perspective, I can just walk to a shop, I can buy a particular drone, and I can go to my garden and I can fly. Obviously, there is an entire set of regulations which asks me to not fly over densely populated areas. It asks me not to fly too close to people. There is an entire privacy issue and all of that. But physically, if I want to fly the drone, I can just get it out of the box. I can hit the joystick on the remote, and the drone will take off. In contrary to this, India has all these regulations. There is no drastic difference, but the drones built in India are in such a way that if I have to I have to buy a particular drone, then there is that licensing and number plate sort of a thing where I have to go to DGCA and apply for a UIN number, which is similar to a license plate number that we have in cars. Until I don't get a license plate number, I physically cannot take off the drone. Again, if I have the license plate number, I have to be dependent on a platform. So imagine it is built in such a way that every time you have to buy a car, the process is such that you have to buy a car from an authorized car dealer, from an authorized car maker, then you have to buy it from an authorized car dealer, all of which is authorized by the government. After that, every time you want to drive your car, for every trip, you have to take a permission from the government. And the security is built in such a way that you cannot actually turn on your car and cannot physically drive the car even within your own garage or within your own parking space till the government does not authorize you. So there is a physical lock implemented on your drone, and currently it is applicable to all civil use cases. So for example, if the police wants to suddenly has a situational insight, say for example there is a crowding, or there are too many people coming up and there is a protest happening, a violent protest. So the police does not have that freedom today to just go out, fly the drone. They have to apply for clearances on a platform, and the platform is not live yet. So the manufacturer is registered, the individual is registered, he has the number plate, but he cannot take off because the platform is not live. So sadly, we are at that situation, and the entire ecosystem is built in such a way that till such time that the platform is not live, you cannot achieve compliance, because you will not get that permission and your drone will not be physically able to take off. So that is a drastic comparison. When you compare from laws all across the world and India, everyone has similar set of regulations. Everyone identifies areas of not flying, heights above which you cannot fly, and all that is in sync. So there is no big gap in that policy. But from a trust first framework, there is a drastic difference, which is actually sort of stopping innovation or pausing innovation, if I may so say, right now. So that's the general difference.
No, that was very useful to understand how it pans out in different countries, and I really like trust based framework. I'll keep that in mind. Also, one more question to Mr. Shah. You mentioned standardizations, and I'm interested in specifications. Both have a twin kind of a relationship. I want to know what is that agency in India? Is it BIS that will be building the standards for drones, or at least for the civil use? And what are the agencies abroad which do that? So I just thought I would want some kind of inputs on that. Is there a committee that is building standards? Usually we look to BIS for electronic based or electrical based standards. So are we building standards? Have you initiated a dialogue? How is it? What is the scenario in terms of standards and specification? If I want to purchase a drone, tender out drones, how do I know? Like when you buy a mobile, so you go on the net and you study all the features and do a comparison. Okay, Samsung this model and some other model and this model. So is that, unless you know the specifications or the inbuilt things that go into the features that go into, you will not be able to do that comparison, because you mentioned that there are about 20 manufacturers of drone in the country. So how do I know from whom to buy the drone as an intelligent consumer who's putting the money on the line? So a little thought on that, I think.
So there are two aspects here actually, certification and specification. So you may have a phone which might have a 5000 mAh battery versus a 10,000 mAh battery. So that number is more on the specification. But every battery should have BIS certification. That is the certification angle. So currently the certification is with DGCA, and the mandate has been given to the Quality Council of India to come up with a certification scheme. We are involved in some kind of committee format and some kind of industry expertise format to help them with certain domain knowledge. Also, from a standardization perspective, it will be multiple agencies, not just a single agency. So there will be multiple standards on every component of the drone, and some of them will be spearheaded by BIS, some of them might be spearheaded by the QCI and NABL. So there will be different agencies who will have to work in tandem with each other, and I'm hoping in about 1 or 2 years of time we'll have standards for every single subcomponent of the drone as well. So that is from a certification and standardization perspective. From a more specification perspective, ideally you shouldn't compare the drone with a phone. It is more to do with the use case at hand. So there is a different set of challenges and specifications required for a basic surveying project, versus there is a different set of challenges and specifications required for some kind of hydrology survey. So you need to first identify what is the data that you need, what is the action that you want to do on that data, and then there is a deep dive discussion on the specifications and the options available. Because drones, while there are obviously there are a lot of manufacturers, but there are 20 prominent manufacturers who are in the entire regulatory and approval cycle, and will probably soon get all the approvals as well. So they have different products based on different use cases. So that would probably be the way to approach things in the drone ecosystem. So it's not a one product for all use cases sort of a model.
Yeah, no, I think most technologies have multiple uses, multiple stakeholders, multiple domains of applicability. And I think, a lot of collaboration is inherently inbuilt in innovation and commercialization. So I think I get that point when you say that. And I think that was very, very insightful and very, very useful. As we head to a close of this presentation come panel discussion, I am so, terribly, awfully, in the British manner, beholden to the both of you for, these are untouched topics, little known topics, and I loved the Q&A on the drone bit. There were so many fallacies one had in mind, and I especially loved Madhura ji's various examples from around the country. And I would also urge you to do one internationally, so we also get an exposure of where we are in terms of benchmarking of international standards. But it was a wonderful presentation, very visually delightful. And thank you so much for telling us about Pura. And I'm sure the audience has greatly benefited. And also, I find that, see, this panel is a very right mix of the adding STEM to STEAM to STEM kind of a thing, the collaboration between multi-disciplines, which is something that we have been spearheading. So maybe Madhura ji, in the next meeting on the 10th of the design cohort, we can take something from this to work more closely with the government. I always tell everybody who works with the government, please, always keep making the effort. Be like Mr. Smith, be a policy advocate. Please keep reminding us of the duties that we have towards the civil society, because I feel, I believe in what Ayn Rand has written about virtues of selfishness, because she says that and charity begins at home, because what we do today will enable us in our old age If I build a policy for something today, it will all come back to me. If I design smart villages, maybe someday when I grow old, I can go back and stay in those smart villages. If I design something for drones, maybe I can use them for crisis management. So it is your contribution and problem solving attitude, which is what science is all about. And I usually end all my sessions with a quote from Carl Sagan, because I think he is not just an astronomer, a scientist, a physicist, but somebody who's also a filmmaker, and has written very, very beautifully. I think stargazing does that to you, makes you very, very imaginative. So I am going to use a quote of his to end this session and to inspire everybody, to remind myself. He says that somewhere something is always waiting to be known. And to that I add somewhere something is always waiting to be solved. Some problem is always waiting to be solved. So let us know more and let us solve more, so that we can resolve this dilemma that we all are in as citizens and as consumers. So thank you very much. Grateful to our esteemed panelists today. So thankful on behalf of DST and on my personal behalf. I really thank you with folded hands, and to all our lovely audiences who has been there and who has sent us some very, very inspiring, motivating, encouraging feedback about the very wonderful presentations and interesting, informative sessions. Congratulations to our esteemed panels. Thank you very much for being with us. We take a break, a lunch break, because we want you to be safe. Please ensure that you go wash your hands, wash your face if you are tired, eat something, hydrate yourselves, drink some juice, drink some water, make your coffee, tea, and please come back, because our next session and the last one will start at 4 o'clock in the early evening. And this will be on the last vertical of the acronym called STRIDE E, which is basically engineering and entrepreneurship. And we have some very fantastic people in the panel. We have Professor Shantanu Chaudhary, who's the director of the Indian Institute of Technology, Jodhpur. We have Dr. Vipin Kumar, who's the director of the National Innovation Foundation, India. And we have Neeraj Gupta, who's the founder of the chapter on artificial intelligence. So I think it will be very, very interesting to listen from the engineers, the innovators, people who are re-engineering and socially re-engineering, process engineering, and using their natural intelligence to build artificial intelligence. So please come back, and we will be very, very happy to welcome you. And as we say goodbye to all of you, for the moment, we take a break. I'm extremely grateful, and thank you to all of you. Goodbye. Namaste. Jai Hind.